We started in New York, and at the height of the business had 15 locations, New York, LA, and Chicago, as well as a studio on the Nike campus. That was kind of our offshoot for employees. So that's a little bit about my background, who I am, but I think I really wanted to start this off first of like just wanting to know like who right now is building something. Okay. And who has had a moment of doubt while they're building it? Keep your hand up. And keep it up if you kept going anyways. Amazing. And that's kind of really like, you guys are like my people. You're exactly who I wanted to talk to. And that's really exactly how Y7 started. And it all really started with an injury. So I actually pinched my sciatic nerve, and which is a story for another time, but I got carted off on a police boat from Fire Island
Oh my God.
because they have no medical services. If you know what Fire Island is, it's like, for those of you in the Midwest, it's our Mackinac Island of the East Coast. Um, it's been so fun to come back here. Like, even just driving from the airport, I grew up outside of Detroit and I went to school in Madison. So this like feels like a homecoming for me being back in the Midwest, being to talk to you guys. So I pinched my sciatic nerve. And as I was talking to the doctor, he's like, those spin classes you love so much. No, no, no. Like really kind of low impact. And yoga was the thing that I could do, which really led me to, trying class after class after class after class. And every single time I left feeling not great about myself. It was just not the experience that I was hoping or craving. And it was a lot of, and especially as someone with an injury, it was a lot of, rhetoric from the teacher of, look at me, have your arms like me, sit a little bit deeper like me. Or it was pointing to the front row and this kind of front row culture of, look at Jax. See how deep her knee has bent? And I was like, well, okay. And it really kind of left me in a headspace of, while I was in the class, it took me out of where I was supposed to be, which was in my body, focusing on what I was feeling. And so, after a few months of frustration, living those experiences, and just feeling like I was getting nowhere with like, my recovery or anything like that, had no space to move my body, I did, I think, what any normal person would do. I complained to my boyfriend, who's now my husband. But after months of that, it was really like, well, why don't we just start our own? And I was like, our own what, sir? And the answer was our own studio. This was also in 2013, so Craigslist was the place to go for anything you needed. We hopped on Craigslist. We found a recording studio that actually wasn't being utilized during the weekends. We posted ads on Craigslist for teachers, and it was really from there. It was, this is how I want the class to be run. This is how I want it to be taught. And it was a pop-up. It was completely free, and it was totally just for fun. And after our second weekend pop-ups, our kind of, we were done. That was it. And one of the girls who had been coming came in. She's like, so how do I buy a membership? And I was like, if you give me your email, that would be great. And I'll let you know. We're working on finding, I like fully just like lied through my teeth. And I was like, if you could just drop your email, we're actually talking with real estate brokers right now. And we're looking for a space. We were not, but that was that one single mirrored affirmation that I really needed to be like, oh, this is something. Um, and that was really it for us. That was kind of the start. And what I really love about starting that way is that I think it really shows you what it takes to just get going. So you don't have to answer me right now, but my next question is, who has something in their life that is a pain point that you would love to be solved? Great. That's your business. That's all it takes. And I think that, kind of moving forward at that place, like that was my aha moment. Like, oh, I'm not the only one. So I think when we have ideas like this, we sit on them, right? Like it doesn't exist, so I must be the only one. And it was that one person that showed me that I wasn't the only one that gave me what I needed to get started. So after I politely lied to our very first client, things happened kind of quickly. We ended up finding a space in Williamsburg in Brooklyn. It was month to month. And we signed the lease. It was a 300 square foot spot. If you know New York at all, it was 88 North First. It was really cute in Williamsburg. It was just like the absolute best. And we started with 4 classes a day, 7 a.m., 8:15 a.m., 7 p.m., 8:15 p.m. And at this point, I still had a full-time job. So I'd wake up as late as I possibly could. So around 6, book it to the studio, open the studio, check people in for the 7 a.m., turn the studio over, check people in for the 8:15 a.m., let my instructor close, and I would go to my job in fashion, where I was an account executive. And we operated like this for till we opened our 3rd studio. And it was a really interesting way to grow and scale the business because I was inside of it from the very, very beginning, understanding every nook and cranny of what it took to open, to see the pain points that like my future operating staff would see, to ideate on all of our processes and SOPs. And it was after we opened our Flatiron location in March of 2015. I was working the front desk, and a client came up and she was checking in. I was like, "Hi, how are you? Nice to see you." She was like, "They really work you hard here, huh?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "I see you at every studio. You're here all the time." And I was like, "Oh, here's your mat and towel." I was like, I don't even know what to say. So it was such a, again, this like mirror moment that I have. And that was the comment. And that was the person who, in that moment, she said that to me. I was like, I'm going to quit my job. And that's when I quit my job. So it was like a month into the Flatiron opening, and we kind of went full speed from there. My husband left his job about 6 months later, and we bootstrapped the business up until our 6th location in the Upper East Side studio, which opened in September of 2016. After that, we took private equity money. It was actually one of our instructors' boyfriends who worked at the firm was like, "You guys, how you funding this? What's going on? Do you want to have a conversation?" We're like, "Sure, great." So we ended up partnering with them, and it was just an amazing, amazing time. We opened up until 2020. We opened 11 studios in Manhattan and Brooklyn. We had 2 in Los Angeles, and in January of 2020, we were about 60 days from our opening in Chicago, which was really something that was going to be our first test outside of the coast. I think we all know here that like if you open a business in New York or LA, you don't know if it's going to work anywhere else because the coasts are very different. New York itself is just so populous that like you're probably going to do well, right? And I think the same thing with LA. As long as you're in a great location, you're going to do pretty well no matter what it is. And for me, the other cities, the Chicagos, the Kansas Cities, Indianapolis, those are the cities for me that are the real test. Like, does this have real staying power? So this Chicago for us was an amazing, amazing opportunity to test the market of like, how big can we take this, right? So it was also our first test without ClassPass. So, which in the fitness industry is, very controversial. So really great, we used it for was a marketing tool. So it's a third party that allows you to book for a certain number of dollars a month, and you can kind of try classes without having to commit to a membership or things like that. So it was a great marketing tool for us, but a lot of studios, it ended up kind of putting them to a tough position financially because they were discounting their classes to the consumer, right? And taking a lower cut from the third party and really not running a sustainable business model, because that's not what they built their business on. They didn't build their business on a discount. And, while ClassPass had been amazing for us, this was a cool opportunity to be like, can we scale this and open this without that lever? Is the brand and the experience enough? And so we were excited to test that, and our hypothesis was looking good. We had sold 500 pre-sale memberships in 30 days, and we opened the studios on March 12th, 2020. And at the exact same time, we had actually had a term sheet from Equinox to be bought by Equinox. So we were supposed to be the second coming of SoulCycle. I didn't know that. Yeah. So that was where we were. And, even with where we were with the business, it was, even if that deal didn't go through, I had my team that was going to take me from, these 15 studios to 30. I'd worked really hard to build that team over 3 years. Those were like my people. They knew what it took. And it was a really, really exciting time for us. And then COVID hit. And I was also 7.5 months pregnant with my first child. And I really just everything completely fell apart. And what I've wrestled with since that moment is really what it looks like to lose the thing that you built your identity on. Jax and I were in New York at the same time, and it was really this moment of it was full on girl boss era. We were building things. Our companies were a reflection of who we were. Still is. I think we've all gotten we've gotten better at putting boundaries in place, but really it was we live and breathe these companies. And it was really, really tough. We were in the 3 cities that got hit very, very hard. We were closed for 18 months without $1 of revenue. So I had to start over. Almost, 8 years into the business, or 9 years into the business, and I had to start over from scratch. And, ever since then, we were fortunate. I think the brand was really, really strong. We did an amazing job at building community, putting community first, putting our clients first in the industry. And that served us really well. I think we got a lot of criticism in the beginning for not platforming our instructors and making it about the instructors and things like that. We really put our community first, and the people who were coming in those doors every day, we put them first. And what they wanted, we put them first. So we, thankfully were one of the cases where we were able to reopen. I had to make some strategic closures, but we were able to reopen and open a couple new studios post-pandemic too, which I'm incredibly proud of. And then in 2024, we had an acquisition. We had a strategic acquisition at the end of 2024, and that kind of brings me to where we are now, which is so that's kind of where we are now. And I've had a lot of personal reckoning to do. The company's not mine anymore. I built this thing. I suffered with this thing. I put everything I had into it. And now it's not mine anymore. It's in somebody else's hands. And I think that is, it's such a circular journey of what it means to be an entrepreneur, to build something and to really put, your identity into it, is what it looks like to build the foundation, to scale it, and then to let it go. And to understand you kind of gave it everything you had. You took it as far as it could go. And then, what's next? So I've learned a lot. It's been quite the ride. Jackson, she gets my phone calls and voice notes all the time. Sometimes they're a little hysterical. But I think that's all part of it. And it's part of the ride. And just knowing that this idea and this thing that you love and that you need can become a business. This was never supposed to be a business. This was just something that I wanted to do, an experience that I created for myself to enjoy. And it turns out that other people needed it too.
We can review them. And then
Are you okay if I ask you some questions?
Obviously.
Some of these you actually kind of answered.
Oh, I did?
Skip
Good
them.
for me.
So what would be something about building Y7 that people wouldn't see from the outside?
Oh, I mean, I think brick and mortar is an especially interesting area to go into because not only are you trying to build a brand and a presence and a product and experience, but it is leases, landlords, contractors, TI, lawyers on either side of it. And it's such a behind the scenes thing. Like, I don't think people realize how much goes into opening an actual space. Like, of course, like the paint and all the fun stuff you get to see, but there before that is 9 to 12 months of when you see a space, when you sign that lease, it is such a back and forth and it's such an intense conversation. A lot of times, like, it doesn't work out. You can't get to terms. It doesn't make sense for the business. Like, things change. Like, I have now a system that like I can walk into a space and I can tell you yes or no in like 10 minutes. Once I get a certain amount of metrics, like I can tell you yes or no. I know what kind of amps I need. I know how many mats I need to fit in the room. So it's that part of it. I don't think a lot of people see how long the lead time is to actually get a space open.
So with having physical spaces, did you guys save up money to get that first space? Did you have favorable terms from like the landlords? And how did they trust you that you could pay the rents?
Yes.
Being a first-time business.
Yeah. So it was this is not super typical, I don't think, of early stage brick and mortar, but we were profitable from the jump. So because we took kind of odd spaces and I should have probably said this. So Y7 is dark, it's candlelit, there's no mirrors, use infrared heat. So we can take kind of odd spaces. I can take a second floor, I can take a basement. So we were kind of taking spaces that were not these like pretty retail level spaces that a lot of places really wanted, right? Because you want that storefront. We kind of played this angle of, if you know, you know. I didn't spend $1 on marketing or any ad spend until late 2018 when we started like really opening. It was more like awareness. But it was really one of those things where like we kind of liked those like off beaten path locations. So that helped us with our profitability and getting kind of favorable rent terms. And then it was just showing the unit economics, you know, and I mean, I didn't know any better at 27. I was like, personal guarantee. I was like, sure. I don't own anything. No problem. A little different now, but, you know, it was something we were willing to take. And then, you know, once we did the PE deal, we were able to kind of sign that over and we had like real funding. You know, it became kind of a little bit easier to sign those spaces, but getting creative with that was.
I know I heard you talk a little bit about the PE at the panel. Like, describe like that thought of taking PE versus private capital versus do I just reinvest in bootstrapping it? What was the goal you're trying to get? And like, this is the way we're going to get to grow it.
Yeah, you know, there's a lot that I wish I had known, you know, before we really started looking at taking capital. But really it's one of those things where you need the dollars to be able to invest. It's like when you're doing those build outs, when you're signing that lease and I'm writing that check and it's like 6 months of rent for the security deposit. I'm like, okay, it's very scary. And then, you know, you have to stop doing other things or kind of hold back on some other things. So, you know, that was a big part for us. And we had gotten to the point at 6 studios, we had 5 in New York, 1 in LA, where it was very apparent that we needed a real team. I was managing the entire front of house and teaching staff. My husband was managing like our tech stack, website, a lot of like branding and things like that. But, you know, there became a point where like, we should not be doing payroll. that's something you want me to do. So that was a really big part of the consideration, was what the use for the funds is going to be, right? And you know, I think there's a lot of conversation about like what kind of money you're taking. I think they, VC and P, they both have their ups and downs. I think the downside of PE is that they move very slow. They're very, very data driven in terms of like, it's a lot of like, let's wait and see. And it's like, oh, okay. Well, what are we waiting for? Like, what is the box we have to check to like get the approval to do the next thing? So they're very, very, I would say, they want a lot of information from you, where VC is kind of like, here you go, and like, good luck. And, there isn't usually the kind of support that you would want to see from a partner.
Did you interview or talk with a lot of firms, or was it like
No.
one that?
It was honestly just that one, because we weren't even considering taking money. Like, again, like, had I known what I know now, we for sure would have shopped around.
See, this I'll skip up to that. So what part of building this? So I think in a unique situation of having your co-founder, was your husband when you started out? Or once you
Yeah, I think he was like just my fiance.
Okay. So like
fresh fiance.
So you had a really good co-founder, but what would you even say like the most isolating part of like building it and growing it? What were some of those examples?
It's one of those things where, and it's a lot of the work I do now with founders, is really helping them get out of this kind of like echo chamber. It's such you're so deep in it, you're so close to the product, you're so close to the experience that it's hard to tell, like, that little matrix of that's like urgent and important, not urgent, important, not important, not urgent, and all of those things. It's really, really hard to differentiate what that is, because everything feels urgent and important. And so even though I had a really great co-founder situation, I think it's still really helpful to and necessary to have that outside perspective of like, well, it's actually like, okay, that's like, no one, like, yes, we should do that, but like, it doesn't need to be the now thing that we're focused on.
Was there any like separation of like personal life and work life balance? And balance is a federal word to use, but with it being, your fiance when you started?
I would like to say yes, that I am so evolved that we had these like great boundaries in place, but no, like it is. And it was also tough with, just the schedule of the studios too. It's kind of like not as intense, but it's a little bit similar to a restaurant where this isn't a 9 to 5. My business opens at 6 a.m. I have people arriving at the studio at 6 a.m. to clock into work. Clients start arriving at 6:30, and my closers weren't leaving till around 10 because my last class ended at 9:15, sometimes 9:30, depending on the studio. So there, and I felt a lot of guilt, weirdly, around not having appropriate boundaries. But I had to let that go, because that's not the type of business it is, and it's not what the business actually needed at the time. It needed me to be in it, and for both of us to really like put our full attention on it for it to be successful.
What would you say like the hours you worked in that first 2 years, 3 years?
I don't know what's wrong with me. Anytime people ask this question, like, how did you do it? I'm like, I don't know. Great question. I would, depending on what studio I was opening, whether it was Williamsburg, Soho, or Flatiron, it was like a 5:45 alarm. It was pack my stuff for the full day, work included. It was opening a studio, getting it set up, turning on all the heaters, doing all the things, checking people in. And then it was, making sure a teacher was set to close, booking it to work, working all day. And this is actually one of the reasons we don't have phones at the studios. We cut our phones in, I think, like right before Flatiron. So like early 2016, because all the calls were getting forwarded to my cell phone. So I was like at work and I was like, hello. Yeah, I can switch you to the 7 p.m. No problem. What's your name? I was like under my desk, like in between meetings. And, but it was really like, but it didn't feel like work. And then I wouldn't get home till like 10:30. you know, because I usually would end up taking like the 8:15, and then I go grab a bite to eat, which is like I can't imagine eating at like 9:30 p.m. now. But you know, it was one of those things where it didn't feel like work. I was having so much fun building this, and I was just having such a great time that like doing this like 5, 6 days a week, like I loved it. I really, really loved it. And I think that's how you know you're in the right place too, right? When you love the thing you're building, that it doesn't feel like work. And it was, I always look back on that time and I feel like really, really lucky that I got to have that experience building it.
It's awesome. If you could go back to whether it be year one or year two, what would you do differently?
I don't know. I actually don't think
See, you're a
anything.
really good founder.
I think my struggle really
Yeah.
came with the scale part. Because I was so, I mean, like, you know, I wasn't like 18, but I was young. I was 26 and I had never managed people before. And at the height of the business, like I had 350 employees. And it's just a lot. And so much of my time became managing people as opposed to really running the business. So I think I had a harder time where I'd have changed things kind of in that mid tier, like 2017 to 2019 phase of growth. I would put better systems in place. I think I would have paused to really look what was in place and what I could change before just like kind of moving. So a lot of our stuff was like just we were like, you know, we were ideating as we were going. Like, okay, this worked for 3 studios, it doesn't work for 6. This works for our New York studios, it doesn't work for LA. You know, like what is in, especially in terms of like what kind of hires we're making too for the studio staff. Like what support does the studio need? And do I just put in the support I have in New York for LA? I did that. It doesn't work. It's not, they didn't need the same things, right? So like I didn't actually have what I should have done. Like one thing I wish I would have done earlier is known what kind of revenue do I need to hit in order to put in that full-time person to support that full-time role? Because I just went, well, there are 9 classes on the schedule. We need someone there all the time. So I'm just gonna copy and paste what I have in my New York studio for my LA. Wrong. Within 4 months, I knew not the right schedule, too big, too heavy, not the right times. So I had to make adjustments. And I think if I'd had better systems in place to understand kind of the different markets without just trying to go so quickly, we would have been a little bit better positioned. Yeah. But I think I loved the bootstrap phase. It was fun. Not everybody likes it. I liked it.
And you kind of answered this of like, is there a specific instance of like what broke, like when you started to try to scale? I know you kind of generally talk about some systems. Is there any like specific one that people could learn from, or that you thought was like, if someone had just told me this, I could have saved a lot of headache?
Yeah, I think we hired in the right order. We hired HR and operations like very quickly once we took on capital. We had the budget for those big salaries. We hired those pretty quickly, but it took, God bless Natalie, who's our head of people. I mean, my God, she came in, she was like, "How about this?" But I think I would have invested in a way better HRIS system. So way better like human resources platform to receive feedback from employees, to have a feedback system in place, more of a grading scale of like, is this person getting what they need? Are we seeing what we need for the company to succeed, right? And are we giving the feedback in a way that allows that person to grow so we can make sure they're the right fit? Or is it time to let them go, right? I think and I think this isn't just true of, founders or startups. It's true of a lot of companies. Like everybody is slow to fire. And it's not necessarily wrong. They're slow to fire because they haven't put in the guardrails to set that person up for success. So I think that's something that I definitely wish like we had been better set up for. Because then I think I could have, we could have built a better foundation and had more just like better practices when it came to that, to fostering people's growth.
What's one decision that maybe you felt really risky at the time, but was actually really pivotal in either the trajectory or the growth, though?
Oh, I think kind of sticking with one format. So Y7 up until mid 2024, we offered one class. 95% of our schedule was one class. It was the We Flow Hard. 60 minutes, 3 sequences, 3 times. That was it. And I felt very, very strongly about that, because what I hated about a lot of the yoga studios I was going to was like, I found my class time, right? 7 a.m. Tuesday. I like this teacher. I like what they taught. And then it would switch and it would change. And I was like, what happened to my vinyasa? Who is this teacher? What are we doing? It was like one day I was doing a vinyasa and the next week I was, covered with a blanket going back to sleep, which is not wrong, but it's just not what I expected. And I think that really let me down as a consumer. And what I was craving as the client was something that I could really count on, and something I was sensitive to as, a young girl working in fashion who made a cute $30,000 a year, was people are not only spending their money with us, but their time. So and I really wanted to respect that, because you can go anywhere in New York. There's a billion choices you could make, but people are giving us their time. And in an era where we're all so time poor, I think that to me was the biggest compliment, that people chose to be with us. And I wanted to make sure that they could count on what they were getting. And I got a lot of there was a lot, I think if I'd listened to a lot of the early feedback and a lot of the early suggestions, and you should add weights. You should do what core power does. You should turn on the lights. You should have a beginner class. You should do all of this. Then I don't think we would have been as successful.
Did you have any mentors or advisors along the way that you would go to for feedback, or is it peers?
No.
Wow.
Which is again, and we can dive into this deeper, but that's, a lot of the work I do now kind of post acquisition is being the person I wish I had. Because I think I would have not spent so many sleepless nights agonizing or stressing about things that in reality weren't a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And we're so small compared to the, bigger picture and really what my North Star was in terms of growth and experience. But this was also this was the very beginning of boutique fitness. There was SoulCycle and there was Barry's. Period. That was it. And then there was gyms and there was nothing else. So this was really something that hadn't really been done before in a way of brands. There were yoga studio brands and things like that, but no one had really focused on what it meant to be a brand and to create this kind of cult brand where you could see the prayer hands, someone with a hat with the Y7 prayer hands on, people would be like, so it, everyone knows, even SoulCycle just had this really adorable OG instructor reunion, and everyone knows from that era what noon on Monday means. You can say noon on Monday and every person's yep. Everyone had their alarm set. It was we're pushing meetings, we were getting our bikes. That was, it was really just the beginning of that. Making that kind of part of, your brand identity and, who you are.
So, and are you involved at all anymore, or are you moving on to new things? What's the next 10 years look like for you?
I am working for the company that acquired us. We did a strategic acquisition, so we're getting the business set up for franchise right now. So I'm out of the day-to-day operations, but I'm working on the back end to really get the business set up for franchise. So that looks like kind of our brand Bible, our guidelines, what merch looks like, just making sure that the brand retains its identity and that it's scalable.
We can take some questions. As you heard the story, what thoughts, questions, ask the hard questions for Sarah?
Oh, first time that I'm hearing the full story. Guys, I was a fan. It was the local yoga, if you knew, and I would go before I even knew Sarah, which is wild. But I didn't realize you started it as a pop-up for free. I had no idea.
Yeah.
So my question for you, how did you get over the imposter syndrome? If you didn't spend 10 years as a yoga guru,
yeah,
I didn't have the balls to do this and open this place. And what kind of insurance did you get? How did you? I took a very different approach
than I think a lot of yoga studio owners at the time did, where it was, you're a teacher, you've had 10 years, people love you, you have a following, and you have enough reassurance to be like, I can open a studio and all of these people will come and take my class. I actually wasn't certified until 2015. So I was so hyper focused on the consumer, and I made a choice early on in the business that I do not teach on the schedule. I do not teach. I will teach events. I can. And I really got my certification. So as I was training people and explaining to them the why behind the class format, like why we do certain things, why we don't do certain things, I wanted to have the same knowledge they had. So to make sure I was speaking the same language, right? But I made a conscious choice to stay on the side of the consumer because I built this business for myself. And I think not losing sight of what the consumer wants is incredibly, incredibly important. And like the why behind the reason this business was built, which was really to make yoga accessible for people. I think there's probably some of you in this room who are like, yoga's not for me, I'm not flexible. And flexibility is a product of practicing. It's not something you go into the room with, right? And it is something that you should be able to do throughout every phase of your life, which I think is something that not a lot of people realize either. So I was very, very intentional about staying on the consumer side of the business and being able to take the feedback of, teachers, the experience, and not necessarily take it so personally. And I was able to make smart decisions when it came to the business.
Susan, do you have questions?
Maybe. What's your best advice for working with your spouse or partner?
Girl, how much time you got? I think it's funny because this is, it's one of the, it's an amazing partnership because I can be completely unfiltered and transparent. And then, we can decide together what to have for dinner later, right? And I think in some senses it's easier to make that moment of repair because we are so close and, we do spend so much time together. Again, there's the flip side of that where you just become super enmeshed. When it's a lot of time together, it is, there's not a lot of boundaries when it comes like when we're talking about work, when we're talking about things that aren't work. So it's been really interesting. I think the biggest piece of advice I have is to understand your roles within the company, right? So there's no overlap. We started to get really overlapping. It was something that we had to be like, okay, like if, Lauren comes to ask me a question, I tell her one thing, and then you tell her no, like that doesn't work. So like when it comes to like things, decisions that need to be made and how we're delegating our team and who they come to for the actual end all be all answer, we have to put a system in place for that. And I think that was something that we realized once we started to, this, goes back to my thing, like I love bootstrapping because I didn't have to deal with any of this. But once you have a team, it's like, oh, then that's when we started to have like our first signs of kind of like work conflict, where it was like, I told her to do this, this is why, but like we weren't talking to each other, but people were coming to us individually and were confused. So for me, it's really like making sure that those kind of like separation of duty is super, super clear. I think that's where it can get a little murky and like resentment will start to build. Like, I said this, you didn't listen. But it's like, if you each know what you're handling, like, great.
Okay, so when you were talking about scalability and how you had never marketed yourself as like this really cool underground thing, Jack's like, yeah, you like do. So when you started marketing, and I think you said 2018.
Yeah.
What was that like? And what is like the most interesting thing you learned about marketing to bring you to that next level? I think as entrepreneurs, it's always something, whether you're offering experience or a product, like getting people to that experience.
I actually have a really different take, I think. If there's any marketers in this room, please don't hate me. I kind of think that marketing is not the correct like title. And I think marketing is kind of like, I don't know what that means anymore. Because to me, it's all about brand awareness and presence, right? If you are sending out an email flow for like a sales promotion, that's not marketing. That's sales. That's a promotion to drive revenue. Marketing to me has become more of a brand awareness play where it's like, when we first started marketing, it was really just, hey, we're here. And we used it as a tool to open studios. So we weren't actually marketing, you know, I don't know, a new class time or a certain offering. It was really just like, we're opening in Tribeca, new client special, right? It was some stuff that lived on the website, but it was just spreading it around in that new area. And I think what's interesting is too, when people talk about influencer marketing as well, is that like, we were very big on like, to be honest with you, like we're not product, right? We're an experience. So it's not like I can gift a product and people are on their stories and like, well, I want this thing. Thank you so much. Makes my skin so glowy. We were really an experience that had to have people come in. So in that way, traditional PR and marketing didn't work for us. So we were very big on just like, here's your 5-class pack. You come when you want. You talk about it if you want. And you kind of just have to spread it everywhere, because then it becomes more of an, again, like this awareness, right? Like everybody knows about it. Say like I sent, 5 classes to an influencer. It's in her account. She has her email. She doesn't see them for 6 months. She doesn't go. And then someone starts to talk about it. And she's like, oh, I actually think I have a 5-class pack. Then she's like a little interested. She's like, oh, I have these classes and can use them. So for us, it was never a tool that we used where we depended on revenue from it, which I think a lot of people do. Everyone's very concerned about like CAC and whatever, like all the things. And it's like that, I don't necessarily think is the correct measure to know if what you're doing is right. Because I think if you start to see it, if people start to talk about it, if people start to come or buy the product, then you know something's working. But it's so hard to track and the needle keeps moving. Like the measurements keep moving and changing. There's so much new tech coming out with it too that I'm a big fan of. Like, I honestly think like word of mouth is best. And it's not going to be your influencer. It's going to be like, I looked a lot at my class roster. I was like, who is my person who's coming 5 days a week? Who is that client? Because I'm going to treat that client as my influencer, because that person's spending 5 hours a week with me. That's crazy. That's the person who loves it and gets it and who's going to talk about it. So by treating those customers and clients like that, that to me is like, that's it. That's where you get it. And like, there's a beauty brand called Coco and Kind. And Priscilla's started doing, instead of influencer trips, she's taking her top 1% of consumers on trips, their own like brand trips, to really like reward them for being like their best. Cause those are your people, right? Like those are the people who are talking about your product, the ones who are spending the money with you. Those are the ones that matter, not the girl with like 1 million followers because she's got product all the time. Like that's great. That's amazing. I wish I had 1 million followers. It sounds really nice, right? But like, I think that when you look at it, it's really understanding like who the person who loves what you're doing and they're spending their own money and time with you. Yeah.
Love it.
And that's an easy thing to do because you don't have to pay them.
Yeah,
They're already spending money with you.
2 points there, because I can speak to this with you. Sarah would do a ton of community partnerships. So like organizations, community builders, like have them come in and bring their community to do classes. So that was something really cool you did. And then something interesting you said that we can all take away from, when you worked with creators or tastemakers, you would give them a 5-class pack. So it wasn't a one-off partnership. And they say that it takes 5 to 6 times for someone to become a brand fanatic.
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting too. Like, not just a one-time transaction.
And I think people do things like really tightly because they can measure it, right? And everyone's like, we want to see the data. Does this work? And what we did was a little bit different because like, if, technically our 5-class packs have like, I think it's like a 90-day expiration. Like, come whenever you want. Like, I want you to be happy to be there. Not like, when we tried out PR for a little bit, it was like, our PR girl was like bringing this editor in. And it's like, what if her call runs over? What if she's late? What if she lets you want to go make yoga today? that's okay. I don't want her to be pissed when she's there. Like, I want her to be there. She wants to be there, right? So I think it's having like, again, like, and we're so data driven sometimes by those numbers that we forget that it's about like allowing that person to experience the product how they would actually use it.
Let's give Sarah a round of applause.
Yeah.
Meet the boss. Hold on.
We'll try
Around here for a couple
Yeah.
days. If people want to chat, feel free to. Or if you want to get the cocktail bar, people can go to there too. But thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Kris. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. I love that.